Please welcome to the stage WWD's executive editor, Bridget Foley, and founder and designer of House of Z, Zach Posen.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you, Zach, for being here. As we inaugurate WWD's New York Fashion Week Style Dimension in partnership with Samsung 837. I'm going to read this to get it right. My name is Bridget Foley. That part I usually know most days. A special thank you to Saks Fifth Avenue and Michael Todd Beauty for helping to realize this event. Over the course of the next 2 days, this stage will host several colleagues of mine at WWD, as well as major personalities from the fashion and beauty worlds. Now, to kick off, we are so lucky to have Zach here, and fashion star, TV star, as of this evening, documentary star. And to let you know just how lucky we are, Zach, will you tell us, before we get to the collection, what the rest of your September is going to be like?
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me, Bridget. Yeah, sure. Before we get started, September goes... Well, tonight we have our screening of House of Z, which was a film that was put together over the last 5 years and covering kind of my lifetime and career to date. And then I go and shoot the Trevor Noah show tonight, so that will be on at 11 o'clock. It will air, and I have press previews. I have my previews with my role at Brooks Brothers as creative director there over women's, so I do that today, and then back to press, and then in a week we go to, or less than a week now, we go to Dallas, where I'll be presenting the pieces that I just put online of my collection, and pieces in the store, and pieces delivering in the store, and then the Emmy Awards, because I'm part of the Project Runway show.
And 5 nominees, correct?
Yeah, we have 5 nominations, and it's a big family, the show, and 16 years. And then a screening of House of Z in Los Angeles with Brooks Brothers, where we will then present the collection in person. And then October begins cooking with Zach, my unwinding of my detox when I get home of fashion.
So that's all. So we are so grateful that you're here today. And obviously this is the front end of New York Fashion Week, and what we're seeing in fashion today is, obviously there are still many, many shows, but we're also seeing designers, oh, wait, I'm supposed to cue the video first. Sorry.
Cue the video.
Cue the video. Forget we said all that. We can look here.
We opted to do a photo shoot and video content, basically to experiment and try, a new way of presenting our collection to the customer, and to control a message we want to tell, and then tell a story. Today, when you're building a collection, you have to have real range. And it's really about making different items that are special for different customers. When you put a runway show together, there are these kind of rules that have entered our current industry about a kind of repetition, staying with one silhouette concept and idea, but it's not really how the retail world or the consumers shop today. And if they're gonna buy something designer, it really has to be something unique and special. And how do you create a kind of feeling of cohesion of a collection without being one note? A really exciting casting this season. We have the great opportunity to work with Kate. She'd worn clothing of mine on the red carpet, and then this summer we shot an episode of Project Runway together, and she was so poised, so beautiful, so elegant, and really represented this American glamour and a kind of optimism.
Zach has an amazing way of being able to do all of these different silhouettes and designs while still showing the woman's body through his structure. Everything really accentuates what a woman wants to and is very flattering on her body.
It's finding the subtleties of things that have a modernity to them and a classicism. The role of fashion is to make people dream. You want to intrigue and seduce people to enter into your world and to be elevated. optimism is more important than ever today. It's essential in a world with so many uncertainties. It's important to have that moment of escapism.
What a great video. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I love watching you watch yourself. You're so animated. So that's really, I was very privileged to be able to be at the first day of your shoot for a little while. And we are seeing, as I was saying, people, in addition to having shows, looking to alternatives to shows. And you have done this now for a couple of seasons. Can you, you've talked about it a little bit in the video, but can you tell us why in a little bit of detail?
Well, I want to say first that I love a fashion show. I love theatricality. I love theater. I love that interplay. But I also think that we're living in a different time, and I like being able to tell a story through image and video as well. And I think there's different ways of communication. I think that the tradition of a fashion show, is changing and evolved. How we communicate is fastly changing, and we are playing on a global stage and have that ability to communicate in that way. I also think that today, when you see New York Fashion Week or any of the fashion weeks, a lot of the very large-scale fashion shows are t-shirt companies, denim companies, and they have the ability to create these kind of extravaganzas, and so you have to find different ways of communicating. That's, and I think it was a great opportunity to try new ways and new experiences, and also highlighting the different great talents within our industry in a different way. It's not always easy to focus on one or two models. I'm a brand that has, I think a lot of the success of my brand from an image standpoint has been representing a lot of different women of color, women of shape, age. So that part is a little bit more challenging for me personally. But it also...
Do you mean in terms of...
On my runway, on the red carpet, in terms of the images of the people we've dressed.
Okay, versus your real consumer base, your full consumer base.
Well, consumer base is very diverse. I can't define that.
Talk about the casting for this. I was there. You had two models, Kate and Barbara, and I was there for the first day. Talk about why.
Sure. Well, I fell in love with Kate this summer. I had met her a few times before.
She was so charming. She seemed genuinely
I met her on Project
endearing.
Runway.
Yeah.
That episode is still coming out, and we have lots of talent come through the show, but, it's just there's certain people who got it. And Kate has got it, and it's something that I am drawn to. I'm drawn to people who have real star quality and are good people, and obviously are very beautiful. I wanted to work with somebody who was voluptuous and sensual, and also it's exciting to kind of give a new look on somebody that has such a strong public identity. I haven't ever seen Kate photographed like this before, wearing probably, this kind of clothing before in a whole shoot. And I knew there was this kind of deeper inner level of sophistication and elegance that I wanted to highlight.
We don't have any pictures of
Barbara
in here, but talk about the contrast.
Yeah, and when we cast Kate, her amazing agent at the agency The Lions, Ali, said, well, her really good friend is Barbara. And
tell everybody who Barbara is.
And Barbara has been modeling for a long time. Funny Things in Fashion, it's like a whole new stage in her career at the age of 30. She's a singer. She's Brazilian. She sings Brazilian music. And I trusted him, and she came, and it kind of created this interesting juxtaposition of two kind of iconic American beauties, the kind of glamour of a Marilyn, which is definitely that kind of sexiness is within my work, and that I think Kate represented, and this more kind of understated part of the collection, especially in a lot of some of the day looks, of the more demure, understated elegance of a Jackie. So we kind of ended up with our Marilyn and our Jackie.
Best of everything.
Yeah, and it worked, the two of them. They didn't shoot at the same time. We gave ourselves each a day with each of them. And it's still, a feat to do 40 shots perfected in 2 days. But we've gotten kind of good at it.
One thing that I think is very interesting, you were talking about in doing a show, one of the tropes of sort of the modern show is a very fine focus.
Yes.
So I don't mean one note as a negative, because that can make a very strong editorial,
Yes, of course.
statement. But you two, you do event clothes, and so there's
It's hard to
supposed
put
be
a
special.
gown on the runway. A white runway and a gown. First of all, gowns aren't meant to run. In general, most gowns are not meant to be running.
I run all the time in my gowns.
Running, on the red carpet, they're not really running. And certainly on carpets on a runway, they do not always glide.
And you also, in a collection, you have to show, it's very unified. I want you to talk about the theme.
Sure.
But you have a big range of silhouette and...
Yeah, when you're selling,
right,
so Bridget and I discussed, and I explained, when you sell to a store, they need range of a collection. They need, the LBD, the knit dress to the gown. And in photos, in something editorially, you can create that arch of a story and feeling. On a runway, that's very difficult to do. You can load it up with styling tricks to kind of tie it together. But you really, when you do a runway, there's a kind of repetition. Repetition is reputation.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, Mr. Fairchild. It's, in women's wear tradition. And I think that we're accustomed to that. Our eye gets trained to that. And I think in America specifically, with that kind of runway message. And I had great training early in my career that was formative. I was trained by, really the great producers of fashion, KCD, and I understood this formula, but then I had to learn how to break it for myself and the kind of work I made.
Talk about the development of a collection from inspiration to finished product.
Sure. Well, we build inspiration. I work with my partner, Christopher Nikkei. He's our creative director. He is a incredible researcher, and that's really, he does this all day long and builds. And from there, then we start to choose our fabrications. We start developing our fabrications, building a story. Certain fabrics fall out, something is too expensive, somebody else has an exclusive on. So there's a natural selection process by the time the fabrics get there. At that point, I work with an incredible, very small, loyal, superstar team of designers and artisanal craftspeople in my studio. We start developing techniques, they start sketching. From there, I start draping. I go into my office, and that's my creative meditation, ecstasy time on my mannequin, where it's playing, expressive, and then we start our fittings.
God bless.
We start our
Very
fittings,
nice.
and from there, from the sketches to the muslins that are the mock-ups of the pieces, things take their own transformative process, and it starts developing, and then there's the collaboration on the business side of the merchandising of the collection. I think fashion is the great balance of art and commerce, and it is something you have to be really respectful of. It's not a fight. There is that push and pull, but the two are there to support each other.
When you're doing grand dresses and you're doing
Yes.
elaborate embroideries and you're doing pieces that are hard to rein in terms of cost, how do you strike the balance?
Well, there's certain, there is, I think there's been a mystery of when people see, grand gowns, that in a way this has become a large part of the designer business. I think fast fashion, for good and for bad, ecologically maybe not on the better side, but it is, and from a creative side as well. But that has taken a large part of the designer sportswear market. People have become more comfortable buying more disposable, trendy, stylish pieces. And so the designer market, and for a lot of the department stores, have the ability, when somebody goes into a Neiman's or a Saks or a Nordstrom's in America and around the world, they will invest, if they have the rare, fortunate occasion, into evening clothing. When we're building it, we have key price points that we have to plug them into. And that goes, actually, sometimes I'll have a certain amount of yardage cut and say, build into that. And I don't mind having that confine in some ways, because I will not put in that much more yardage into it. The embroidery part of it is more challenging because that comes a little later in the process. When we have the mock-up, we place the embroidery. We've had a swatch priced about that big. Then you have to multiply it, get a cost from India. Those costs are related to how many you produce of a piece. Everything is amortized. The more you produce, your labor cost can go down. I do produce most of my collection still here in New York, and I'm very proud of that. It's not easy to produce anywhere. I want to say that. It's hard, challenging. Production is a challenging thing, especially when these pieces are so engineered. But we have a merch plan for our evening wear. We know that we need, the starting point opening dress. We have a whole group that I call our bondage jersey. We have our shapes that get continued because retailers need that comfort zone filled. And then they need fresh and new and special. Nobody wants things that are not authentic, special, and rare, especially when you're paying a pretty big price point.
Now, you've talked about the challenge of fast fashion, and there's also an additional challenge to day wear, which is that very many of us, for much of the time, run around in yoga pants, and yet you are focusing on also growing what you call high day.
Yes.
It seems, is this an odd time to be growing that area?
To be growing, I needed some gown relief, personally. And, something...
Will you tell people what you mean by high day?
High day. So imagine a very fancy crepe dress, something that you could wear from a cocktail, or something you could wear to a business meeting. It's definitely more dressed up day wear.
It's really
there
beautiful
used to be a
cotton
thing,
shirt dresses.
Yeah, cotton dresses with technique on it. They're not they're very price competitive. They're entry price point for us. I think part of our success has also been, partnering with I partnered with Jillian, who runs my company, as my president, and that partnership, is being in touch with your retailers.
Talk about that, because I think so often today we see designers, younger designers, basically people wanting to be all things to all people.
Cannot.
You really seem to have identified a niche.
Yes. I, early throughout my career, tried a lot of different paths. I think I started out pretty pure, and then it was like all these voices, and this is in the documentary. And then, came the time where I realized working with a studio in the kind of artisanal manner that we work in really lent itself, because of the fabrics I like to use, the techniques, into an evening market, and it was kind of a continued tradition of an American tradition of social dressing, and I I don't use the word couture because I don't I think that's real, and there's
so that is one of the most misused words, right?
Totally. And we do
not that most people care. A few of us do. But
I really care. There's laws.
You're right, exactly.
There are fashion laws. And there's a historical industry in France for this. But we do custom-made pieces, and that follows more into that tradition.
And it is a fact, because couture is such a rich and deep tradition, but so too is that tradition of social dressing, of American social dressing.
Huge. It's a
and
big
that is very,
part
very
of it.
specifically.
I think America has, and I don't like to put, I hope it redefines. I look to the next generation of talent to redefine this, but I think there's two schools. There's the amazing contribution of great American sportswear that we have brought to the world, and that's through utilitarian necessities, through social change of war over history, and and women going to the workplace and those needs. But that became, intersected into fashion, and that became very influential, casual style. Then you have the great American social dressing, and I think that kind of touches to the tradition of a country's growth and foundation with, originally people showing their power, their wealth in the new country of America, and you start that with really the beginnings of fashion designers, because you have this designer Charles Worth, and he dressed the new regime in America that then would go to Europe, and their dresses were very, at that time, ostentatious to the Europeans and loud. But that continued with great designers such as Pauline Trégère and and Galanos and Oscar and Mrs. Herrera, and it's important to American and global luxury retail, and it's something very special. I feel very honored to work in this tradition and to have found a very clear, untortured path. It's a pleasure to build this kind of clothing.
You say untortured, but then you also reference the House of Z, which is having a screening tonight. And you arrived on the scene as a wunderkind out of Central St. Martin's, and the world was your oyster, and everybody loved you. And talk about, when all of a sudden there were... I was very ambitious, very naive when I entered into fashion. It was, it happened very fast. I would have been really happy with a few internships at that time, but my school wouldn't allow me to apply for it. Oh, I didn't know that.
I watched a box.
Why?
Because they had a whole class above it that they needed to place. There are just not as many jobs as we wish there were for as many students as there were. Anyhow, so at that moment, word of mouth spread, press happened on pieces I was making. I grew up in a very loving family, a very
creative family.
Grew up on Spring Street down the block, and I was exciting, and I had this opportunity. I had a retailer. First, Julie Gilhart came to an apartment that I was living in London and saw the pieces.
Julie Gilhart is? Tell people.
Julie Gilhart was the fashion director of Barney's for over a decade.
Amazing. An amazing woman and talent.
Visionary. Yeah. And, I think in this role in fashion, it's about having those antennas to find new talent. And that's really,
And to take a chance on new talent.
And to take a chance on it. So that was great. And then she disappeared, and I didn't see her, and there was nothing to really buy. It was one-of-a-kind frocks, and there was just this build. I had a dress that was put into the Victorian Albert Museum, and I came back to New York. There was a retailer in Lower Manhattan called Mark Baguda, and he had a boutique, and he wanted to partner with me. He said, I want to put you on the top floor of my store in Soho and build a company with you. And I came back that summer, and my mom and I read this contract, and we thought, no, not right, but we love Mark, and really one of the greatest eyes, and I think that's a missing store in New York. And from there, Henry Bendel's came, and they wanted to buy, and then 9/11 happened. And it was pretty shocking for the entire city, and hit fashion very hard. Very, very hard. And I had a reflection period where I thought, what are we doing making dresses? This doesn't feel important. And, at the same time, we were just about to present a collection to Henry Bendel's off sketches. I presented sketches and said, would you be interested? And they said yes. And my mother very smartly negotiated 50% upon order, which really hadn't been, and that's the only way that I was able to really start my business. There was no trust fund, there was no funding of this. This was really entrepreneurial. And then an amazing brand called Miguel Adrover was unfortunately closed by venture capital, which is a real tricky double-edged sword within its investment into fashion because of the conversion turnaround. And they closed that, and I was able to buy my first sewing machines in my parents' living room. And then with this collection, one pattern maker, one sewer, people had no jobs. Mm-hmm. People were shut down. Production was shut down in New York. The only way I was able to produce was because at that moment, I believe Ralph Lauren had pulled production in New York, and they were open to taking something new into those factories.
But along the way, you had challenges, though.
Many challenges. Financial challenges.
And there were sort of wins that when you were the golden boy, then you sort of experienced some shifts, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I entered, and I would say fashion got very, very excited. And we did a show. I had been working as an intern in fashion since I was 16, and I was on the scene. I mean, I knew a lot of the models. They were actually close friends. They walked it. It was putting together that thing, and fashion got overexcited, and it was like go time. I mean, I think in those first 2 years, I was traveling to all the fashion weeks with an incredible mentor of mine who's not in the film, unfortunately, Cal Ruttenstein, who I had lunch with for the first 3 years of my career once a week.
That's amazing, the length of Cal's and the power of his.
He was incredible.
Career. Yeah, he really was.
And really,
he was the fashion director at Bloomingdale's.
And really a pioneer.
A real
supporter
pioneer.
of mine. I don't think that.
And an aggressive champion of young talent.
Unbelievable.
I mean, just relentless and aggressive and wonderful and daring.
Yeah, and pushing
really
me to
daring.
take risks and
Yeah.
transition and change. Mm-hmm. Don't get stuck with the trumpet hem. Smart things that he would say, and I'd be like, really?
Big issue things and small is very specific.
Yeah,
but no trumpet hem.
he way ahead of the time wanted me to do a Lesage T-shirt collection and had it all set up.
Wow.
Which would have been, way ahead of these luxury T-shirts. There were just certain things that he was really smart and ahead about. And, it was overwhelming and scary. And I really, at this moment in my career, had this thing where I thought, all these people are in fashion. A lot of them, they want to be part of some lifestyle. Mm-hmm. This is about some, and the lifestyle.
And you did too, right?
The lifestyle was attainable for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least
to
be a toy for it. And that was the transition. So it was fun, it was fast building, but I had a transitional moment when our company was quite challenged around 2008, where I realized that this was not what I was about. It wasn't about planes, vacation, exotic locations. Sure, this is incredible experiences to have, but it was kind of a realization that my life and my daily routine and what I was about my company and about my work and collections, and that was my lifestyle. And that was a huge transitional, refocusing, changing moment that my life was my work, and the work wasn't to facilitate a lifestyle.
So let me ask you, I think do we have students here?
I had to
Yeah, okay.
and get to work, and I had the right people come into my life.
Okay.
I mean, I had an amazing president come into my life. I started working with my partner, stopped working with fashion PR companies, I brought it all in-house and really built my team, and
I mean, you're
stopped
still
working
really,
with my family. That was a huge
that was,
challenge. I mean, I built my beginnings of my company with my mother and sister. They're still on the board of my company. But on a daily basis, it had gotten to a place that was very stressful because creativity is emotional. Building a business is challenging.
And family's emotional.
And family's emotional, and you do what you can do to survive, to create. You do whatever it can take, whatever sponsorships, whatever it takes. At least I had to do it.
For the students here, without being pedantic, you're still young, and
I'm very.
And have had an incredible trajectory in a very short time. But what single piece of advice would you give students thinking of going out onto their own, right out of school, or would?
What would the advice? Well, I would say take your time. Don't have a building process. Start small. It's not one piece of advice. My one piece of advice is get sewing and get cutting and get draping.
Sounds good.
Start finding your shapes and form and wear your own clothing. This is like the craziest thing to me. You know, if you can, wear it. You are your best advertisement.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Let me ask you, now let's switch gears a little bit. I mean, we don't, Project Runway, is it more real fashion or more reality TV?
Well, that's a great question.
Thank you.
It's both. It's really both. These incredible talents from all across the country and around the world are actually making these pieces in a day and a half. Is that real? Is that fashion? Well, it's its own kind of. It is fast creativity on challenges.
Different kind of fast fashion.
Different kind of fast fashion. Maybe that's the future of fast fashion. Maybe it's small, localized. We can make something for you in 3 days, pieces.
What is the difference?
And then our filming part of it is a balance. I mean, I try to give really real, I give as much of a real reaction as I have, and so does Nina Garcia, and so does Heidi Klum. We all come from incredibly
Who's the
different
meanest
perspectives.
judge?
The meanest judge. Mean is mean is hard. I mean, I think, you know, Nina has Mina Garcia. That's her tagline, as she should. She's the fashion director. You know, I can be very tough. You know, fashion is so saturated. There's no room for mediocrity. There just isn't. You have to push yourself and work as hard as possible to define who you are, what you want to say, and really, season after season, every day, give it your all. This is not a dilettante's game.
Certainly not.
This is your life, and if you want to be in this, you better be prepared. Make the sacrifices. It's about being a long-distance runner. Longevity, creativity should be a lifelong pursuit. You know, that evolves it from kind of youth-centric mentality of the culture we live in, which is nonsense.
How do you deal with that? And how do you think fashion as an entity and is dealing with that? Because everyone's so obsessed.
I think they're scared. I think the world is scared, and I think...
On that note, you talked about the need for fashion to be optimistic.
Yes, our role, you know, now with social media especially, there's a larger viewer to fashion. Fashion has become something
and you have a lot of them, right? Like a million plus, right?
Yeah, million plus. Entertainment, people follow it just to dream. And it is so important. The human I think creativity and dreaming in some ways can add to a kind of peace. I know that sounds grandiose in some ways, but I really believe that you need to inspire people to dream. I really believe in the importance of dreaming, the importance of the imagination, to take people to remove them. It's kind of the same responsibility that filmmaking and Hollywood has had throughout history, where it's important to transport. And I think fashion has that importance too. And I really admire, you know, people and great designers that have come before me that have enchanted in this way.
Well, on enchantment, I think we'll wrap it up because our time is up, and I would love to open the floor or the stands to questions, if anyone has questions for Zach. Yeah?
Hi. I should preface this by saying we're from Pantone, so maybe you're going to be very prepared for my color, but I'd be really curious to know where color sits for you. And I have to imagine it's starting at the inspiration because it's part and parcel, and we're big fans, which is why we're here. So.
Well, I love color. I would say for me, my starting place for color is from my father, who's a painter. I just have to give that. I mean, half of the house I grew up in was his painting studio with a palette. I think he has a very, very sophisticated color sense and a way deeper nuance than I have. But it starts with inspiration. I also love nature. I mean, you cannot beat the imagination of Mother Nature.
This collection was inspired by gardens, right?
Gardens.
Yeah.
I mean, Mother Nature is wacky. It is surprising. It's twisted. It can be what we imagine as ugly. But I don't, that's all constantly evolving. I think that color is emotional and powerful. I mean, I can see it from, even if I post something in one color, it will extend in that way. And I think color changes culturally from what is happening in the world. No, it's okay. I like color questions.
About the inspiration, I love what you said about the imagination and the creativity and the need to transport. I think it's great and agreed.
Thank you.
And I like the thing about your father, because it takes me down a path of learning colorful expression and being able to experiment and explore and just play.
Kids should have materials. As important as it is learning arithmetic, they should be able to express themselves in other ways. And I think using your hands and being tactile with your eyes and expressing it is a learning experience in itself. Color. I'm really into a color right now, which was our new black palette for this season, which I called Midnight Palm.
So beautiful.
And it's
really,
the
really
dark green,
beautiful.
almost like a darker, technically Jaguar green, I would say. I thought about it was in Newport a week ago, and I saw these dark green Jaguar cars. But anyhow, it's that color when I was taking photos with my phone of the palm trees in LA. What is that night color where it's so dark, it's almost an off black of green? And so I was excited about that.
Anybody else? Another question? Yes.
Hi, Zach. I'm currently studying fashion design in Parsons too. So my question is, are you going to expand to menswear in future?
It's funny. It's my second most asked question. Maybe in time. What I've learned over time on the business side, and I have multiple licenses and collaborations, is it's about finding the right partner and patience for that.
Answer your first most asked question.
Who's your favorite person to dress?
Who's your favorite person to dress?
I never answer. I don't have one. I have many.
Excellent.
Those are the two. Any others?
Hi, Zach. I was fortunate enough to see that screening in Newport last week on the lawn. It was terrific. Any aspirations to get behind the camera and do some directing?
I'd love to work on film in time as well. I hope I have.
I think a designer's done that. Somebody's tried that.
Few people.
Yeah.
A lot of, there's that crossover.
That's
it's within time. I mean, in my life, I would like to be able to design for theater. I have heroes.
You've never designed for theater?
Not really. Not a full production. I'm waiting for the right project. There's stories I'd want to tell. It's always that pull of wanting to produce something and develop it, and then do I want to assemble the talent? Because I really believe in collaboration. I don't have that kind of insecurity of the collaboration in that way. I really highlight my team I work with in my studio.
You really do, don't you?
I mean, they're superstars. They come from such depth, and they're part of it. I might be the face man that works for it, but this is about our time, of our community, of our family. So when I do take on a film and there's great storytelling to tell, I want to. I also think film is going to change format. I mean, it has already. It's direct on demand, but even how you tell stories, so we'll see. In the future, maybe. Thank you.
Another question for Zach?
Donata?
Anyone? Oh, yes, right here.
Oh, I like your blouse.
Thank you. You mentioned that you had a lot of terrific mentors throughout your life. What's the best piece of advice they've given you during a time of crisis?
Great question. In a time of crisis, mentors. Well, I will say that in my own experience, in my time of a crisis time, I really had no mentors from the industry. Whether it was timing, I was too young, my behavior, from insecurity probably, there really were very, very few mentors. My boyfriend at a time when I had no money, had to move into his apartment, had transitioned life into that zone. He took me to Japan, and we sat in the back seat on the JAL plane, and we got to Japan, and I had this kind of one angel man, an American man who had moved He was the designer. He'd worked with Chrome Hearts 20 years ago, moved and never left Japan. Mr. Hollywood, they called him in Tokyo. Wild character named Justin Davis. Well, his best friend in the world and a man had just, because they were so close, and this bromance had moved above him, was a great designer named Yoji Yamamoto. And, you know, somebody whose work I love very much. And he kind of understood where I was and said, you know, you need to fall on your face. And you need to go to Paris and fall on your face.
So you went to Paris on Yoshi's recommendation?
Kinda.
I didn't
Part
know
of that, with a little
That's
nudge from him. And he now kind of, and I knew his history, but didn't understand the reaction 30 years before when he had gone, when there was the Japanese invasion and gone to Paris. He said, and he said, because you need, he said, the techniques are there, the point of view is there, but you need to have this experience to refocus on what you're going to represent to America. And he was really kind of right. It was not, so that was like a tough love kind of advice there, but it was very foreseen and very generous. And so that was some good advice. And trying to think, yeah, I think that was that tough moment, you know, was there. But besides that, it was a very isolating time. You know, in the documentary sheet, there were lots of rumors about me, about my health, about my life, and it was not fun, and it was scary.
Has that made you more open to sort of, not mentoring or offering advice or wanting to be there for younger designers coming up?
I'm always there. I'm like a real open door. I think sometimes people are intimidated. I can't take as many people as instant messages I get on social media to come intern for us or come work, find their way for me. I'm really happy. You know, at some point I would love to be a mentor on the CFDA. I don't understand why they haven't asked me, but...
Well, maybe now they will, CFDA.
You know, things
Come
like
on.
this, you know, I'm really understand, you know, as much as I can, because it is evolving and changing, where, you know, this world is going. And I think there's also a moment where there's a scale evolution. I think there was always this time when people would start a collection, and then this idea that it very fast had to become a word that I know sometimes makes you uncomfortable, a brand. Yeah.
My least favorite word.
Your least favorite word. And I will say that I remember our first meeting, I used that word.
It's so unemotional. It's so...
I used that word with Bridget, and it was because all of a sudden I had this pressure. And of course, I didn't know what my brand was. I had no idea. What is a brand? You know, it's...
Well, to me, a brand is clinical and fashion's emotional.
Exactly.
You know, yeah.
And it was that, anyhow, there's this pressure to do that, and I think authenticity is what's important today, more than that. And if it evolves into something beyond that, then maybe you have that kind of opportunity. But I think I'm always, you know, people find their way into my studio, and I'm happy. You know, I like if I can give advice or give, you know, direction. Yeah. I think generosity within our industry is really important in the community. That's really...
I want to go back to something else that ties a couple of things together that you said. You talked about how film will change and video will change, and then but kids need materials. Kids needs tactile things.
Yeah.
Kids from birth are so geared now. There's so much that's wonderful about you know, technology and video and whatever, but then if you look at the tactile element, your collection, I saw 1,000 textures in that one collection. And are we losing, is there a risk of losing that because so much is flat screen development? And you know, you can edit a video by the time you're 10, but...
I really think a balance has to be struck. I mean, I think that as the world evolves, you know, you hear a market crash, there can be a tech crash. We still have to be able to use, you know, humans are programmed genetically to have a tactile survival things. We have to be able to have that hand-eye coordination, and it cannot only be on a screen. I mean, I'm born 1980. I'm totally trained on like the Apple IIc and then on, but using my hands and expressing my hands was really important in my house. So I really think for young children, you know, like turn off the phone, turn off the tablet, and you know, get a piece of clay and see what comes. I think it's important. Get the fabric.
Do we have one more question for Zach, or are we? Oh, yes, please. Yeah.
This is more of a life question, but in terms of everything you have to do during a day, how do you really find that balance? And for someone who's just starting out, making sure that you're getting as much as you want out of your personal life as well as your professional life?
I would say that you have to make a choice. You know, I wouldn't, you know, my personal life, unfortunately or fortunate, you know, it is what it is, takes some form of a back seat. That's just the reality of it. And there's choices. I don't see my friends as much as I'd like to. I've offended many people by not going to destination weddings of good friends. You know, so that's the choice that I have made. I feel bad. Sometimes I feel like I'm not as much there as I could be for them. And it's about a fine balance, especially when you work and build something with your partner. I mean, it's funny how I went from my family into my partner, but there is this level of intimacy and commitment. This takes commitment. Do we have one more question? I don't want to end on
one
that
more? Okay, yes. There you go. Right here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Since Paris is so important for you, like a landmark, do you return frequently to the same Paris you saw in those days? Do you have a specific place that is an iconic inspiration spot in Paris?
Wow, that's a good. I do not get to Paris as much as I would like to. What an amazing city. Wow, there's so many parts of it. It's a very special, rare place. Favorite parts of Paris. Wow.
I'm going to be next week.
Oh, you're going to be, so you want to list.
I'm going to take a picture to share.
Oh, to share?
Yes.
Okay, on Instagram, we have to come up with, well, I think you should definitely go see the new renovated Picasso Museum, for sure. That's an incredible special experience in Paris. There are so many great museums. That's the other thing. Take your children to museums. Like, I think that's broadening. I just think it's so important to be exposed and have that experience and understand your relationship with something, with history and something emotionally, visually. So, I mean, Paris is very special. Paris, you know, for me in my professional career was like one crazy, gung-ho, risky moment to go there and how we did the show and everything. But I don't regret it because it kind of was an important experience to go through. I think for, you know, this whole new wave of designers from New York that have gone there, I'm sure they'll be back. And, you know, I also, and if they're not, incredible. I think every creator has their own journey. I really believe that, and that's important to respect and have the empathy for and watch and see.
And that is a good note to end on, but I think you had one more question. Yes.
Yes, thank you for the excellent presentation. Zach, who were some of the designers who inspired you, not mentors, but designers you looked up to and said, well, maybe one day I want to be as great as these guys? Of course, you are great.
Well, it wasn't a guy. It was a gal. It was Madeleine Vionnet. I was, you know, very lucky to intern at the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum when there was a great curator, Richard Martin. He hired me there. He was giving a tour, and I was the kid asking a million questions. So I started interning there, and they were working on a book and research for one of her great books of Madeleine Vionnet, Betty Kirk book. And so we had to look at the patterns of her clothing, and it hit something in me about this power of femininity and glamour and movement and ease and a real kind of purity of shape and form that just excited me. So that's the first. Then on the other side of it the incredible structure of Cristobal Balenciaga is just unreal to me and very expressive. Then moving to living designers, I mean, the work of Azzedine Alaïa is pretty spectacular in terms of, we can come back across the pond. You know, the work of Roy Halston is pretty fabulous. I like, and then in terms of Imagination Nation, you know, the work that Christian Lacroix, John Galliano, I mean, I think has made spectacular and I think he really changed fashion and how to build a modern luxury brand. You know, many, and I mean, it's kind of endless. I'm inspired by different pieces of lots of designers' clothing, Yohji's clothing, and today, I mean, I think Dries Van Noten and Rick Owens have built really wonderful collections and make great clothing and have a very strong identity. And I feel like from a business perspective, their brands have a real solid foundation and you know, are really wonderful, strong brands within scale.
And it's interesting that you've come back to people who are doing it their way, and because it's very, and have had long-term success at that because it's so hard to do.
And seem like, you know, for the last two, happy people.
Yes, they
which
do,
is important.
Yes. That's also important. Zach, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank all of you. And we at WWD, thank you so much for coming to this first presentation, and I hope that you'll be able to make some of our subsequent presentations because they sound pretty terrific. Thank you all very much.